Well, I admit it's been a frustrating few weeks, but I think we can finally put all the turmoil and drama behind us and get our lives back on track. So, as I sit and wait for my wife to finish taking a shower, I'm going to have to tell you a little bit of history. My name is Dave Swinburne. I dropped out of school at 16 and took a job as an apprentice with a local agricultural machinery company. It turned out that, despite my lack of academic ability, I was pretty good with machinery, especially large machinery on farms. After only 8 years at the age of 24, I am making a pretty good living, and my job is as secure as it can be. The next thing you need to understand is Katie. I met her when she moved here to study biochemistry at the local university. There she met my sister Eleanor, and they became best friends almost immediately. My wife, Sophie, claims they are closer than most siblings. So back to the point, Ellie introduced me to Katie. I was immediately smitten, and we were a couple throughout her 3-year course. We went everywhere together. I was paying, of course. By then I was 19 and earning, and the girls were struggling to make ends meet on their student loans. However, all good things come to an end. After graduation, Kathy received a job offer she couldn't refuse at a pharmaceutical research lab about 300 miles away. I suggested she look for a job in the area, but she put her hand on my cheek and told me she couldn't live with the guilt of tearing me away from my family and friends, and that it was time to break up. That was 3 years ago. About 6 months after Katie left, I was in a pub with a group of guys from the workshop when a gang of girls came over to the next table. Their table was missing a couple of seats, and we had a few free ones, so we passed them over to them. That melted the ice, and we started chatting. Nothing serious, just friendly chatter between tables. There was one girl I couldn't take my eyes off of. Pretty tall for a girl, overweight, but not fat, just busty. I watched her as she walked over to the bar to get a drink. She had a great ass, and the tight jeans showed it off to perfection. She was pretty too, but without the glamour, if you know what I mean. She was the quietest in her group. Not that she didn't say anything, but she seemed to think before she spoke, unlike some of her friends. The next time she got up to go to the bathroom, I followed her to the bar and ordered drinks for myself and a few other guys. When she came back, I caught her eye and asked if I could order her a drink too. She declined, but thanked me, and we started chatting. "You've been staring at me all night," she remarked. "I didn't mean to offend," I apologized, "but a pretty girl like you should be used to it." "Very nifty," she complimented me. "You're a real charmer, aren't you?" I was confused. I'll be frank. I hear people talk about social signaling and reading the room, and it seems like I'm the only one who doesn't get it. "It's just the truth," I insisted. "You're very pretty, and you're easy to talk to." She looked at me thoughtfully. I felt like I was in an airport scanner. However, she apparently liked what she saw. A 6-foot-tall mechanic, clean hands and nails neatly groomed and reasonably drinkable. She held out her hand. "Phone," she demanded. I pulled out my phone, unlocked it, and held it out to her. She took it and stopped. "Are you seeing anyone? I'm serious. Do you have a girlfriend, boyfriend, or at least a gender-fluid other half? I'm not going to be another woman." "I'm single," I assured her. "The last person who called me her boyfriend left a few months ago, and the girls I've dated since then probably don't even remember my name." She thought for a moment and sent a text message. A notification sound came from her bag. "Here, you have my number. Put it under the name Sophie in your contacts. Call me if you want to. But—" Here she gave me a hard look. "Don't play games. I think I could get to know you better, but I don't have the patience for guys who screw me over. If you're interested, call me. If not, don't." She handed me back my phone, smiled, and went back to her friends. I paid and took 3 pints from the bartender, then headed over to my buddy's table and carefully set the beers on the floor. Gary must have noticed my distraction. "You dog!" he gloated, raising his hand in greeting. I left him hanging. "Seriously, Gaz, you're 14? I raised my pint and noticed Sophie looking approvingly from another table. As the evening progressed, the boundaries between the groups blurred somewhat, and she and I ended up sitting opposite each other and just talking. It was nice, nothing intense. What schools we went to, what we did, where we lived. When we parted in the parking lot around 11 p.m., she kissed me on the cheek and whispered, "Just for the record, I enjoyed my first date with you." She then headed off to her friends who were bantering with her, chanting, "Oh, Sophie got a boyfriend," from where they were waiting outside. It was only 10 minutes to my apartment, and I was halfway there when the possible significance of her comment came to my attention. Good girls don't think about sex until the third date. Perhaps Sophie was just pushing us through the process. I made a mental note to stop by the drugstore at lunch the next day. When I got home, I put the kettle on, and while I waited for the tea to brew, I sent a text. "Enjoyed tonight. Call you tomorrow." I didn't use cute language in the text. It wasn't like we. She replied 5 minutes later. "Me too. Looking forward to it." I got a good night's sleep that night, and the next morning, before heading to work, I texted, "Can I call you at lunch?" As I drove to the workshop, my phone beeped. "Please, around 12:30. I called, and we made a date at the movies. The next date, 3 days later, was over a nice dinner at an Italian restaurant. After the meal, we ended up in my bed. She was impressed that my apartment was clean and neat. She was impressed that my bed had clean sheets. She was impressed that I had a selection of condoms. I'm not a porn star, but I have the right to be a little smug. Our first time together was just raw sex. Neither of us had slept together in over a month, and we just needed to practice. And how did we do it? Eventually, I slipped out of her and rolled onto my side, like a gentleman should, trying to stay awake. "Well then," she muttered contentedly, "that was everything I could have hoped for." "Absolutely," I wheezed, trying to regain my breath. We lay there, basking in the aftertaste, for quite a while before I went to the bathroom, lost the contraceptive, and generally cleaned myself up. "David," she said, "as long as you give me your full attention, what is it? Are we sex friends or is this a relationship?" She paced back and forth. "You're going to get fucked either way, so it's not a trick question." I thought I understood. "I'd like to see you again, and I'd really like to do it again. If you feel the same way, then I won't date another woman until you tell me it's over between us." That seemed to satisfy her, and with another shake of her hips, she said, "I agree. We are an exclusive couple." And then she took over, leading me like a bicycle down the cobblestone street. When she was done with me, we were sweaty and satisfied. This time it was her turn to collapse on top of me. It wasn't difficult. "You like my breasts, don't you?" she murmured contentedly in my ear, relaxing. "I like everything about you," I yawned. "Because you said it so well," she purred sleepily. We lay like that for ages, and then nature called to us and we took turns heading to the bathroom, each taking a quick shower before climbing back into bed. Over breakfast, we defined the boundaries of our relationship. Sophie began. "I enjoy sex, and I really enjoy sex with you. You can ask me for anything you want, but no means no. I don't share, so no threesomes. But you can drop in on me every year or so if we're still together, and I won't take offense." She smiled understandingly. "Women fantasize about 2 men, too. I know it makes some men feel insecure. I'm not going to ask in the foreseeable future, but if I do and you say no, that's okay, too." I liked her open approach, so I told her I agreed. "Good," she continued. "Now about priorities. We're in an exclusive relationship but not engaged. My family comes first, then my job, then you. If you want to have your own priorities, tell me. If our relationship changes, we can revisit it." I considered her words. "I don't disagree with anything you've suggested, but why so detailed?" "Experience," she replied bitterly. "My last boyfriend claimed that everyone pays for a lap dance at a buddy's bachelor party. He also thought there was nothing wrong with just chatting up women in bars during their weekend in Magaluf. Chatting! I saw those damn pictures before his stupid buddies deleted them from the net." She was starting to get angry and frustrated. She took a deep breath to calm herself down. "So this time," she continued, "with you, I want us to be clear. I don't want to be accused of controlling you, but I expect to be treated with the same consideration as you." She looked across the table at him. "Is that fair?" "Absolutely," I agreed. That conversation started our relationship. 2 months later, my parents insisted on inviting my girlfriend over for Sunday dinner. They fell in love with her as soon as my mom opened the door, and Sophie handed her a small bouquet of fresh flowers. The lunch went well. Even my father, a quiet, brooding man, seemed impressed, and not just by Sophie's impressive breasts. Ellie was silent throughout the meal, and I commented on this to Sophie as we left. "She hates me," Sophie replied. "She misses Katie, and I'm not good enough as a replacement. Your ex is a graduate biochemist, and I work in a construction store." I thought about it on the way home. Allie's problems aside, our relationship blossomed. 2 months later, I proposed, and another 6 months later, we were married. Ellie asked if it was okay to invite Katie. Sophie's answer, relayed through me, was a simple no. We had been married just over a year when Ellie called me. "Katie's moving back in," she informed me, panting. "Her boyfriend cheated on her, and she's devastated." "That's too bad," I sympathized. I saw Sophie look over to see what was wrong. I shook my head. "None of our business." She turned back to her journal. "She's been transferred to the development lab on the industrial estate. I told her she could stay with me." There was excitement in Ellie's voice. I would have hoped she was more worried about her friend being dumped. But this was my sister. She could be a self-centered bitch at times. After the call, Sophie turned to me to find out what had happened, and I told her what Ellie had said. My wife frowned. "What?" I asked. "Your ex is moving in with your sister, and your sister doesn't like me," she said, as if that explained everything. I must have looked confused. "If you and Katie made up, she could stay here and Ellie would get her best friend back." "But I'm married now," I pointed out. "Then just remember that," she told me, and then went back to her magazine. A week later, Ellie called again on her lunch hour. "Could you stop by on your way home from work and help me fix my bed? Katie's coming over this afternoon, and I'm not really ready." I reluctantly agreed and called Sophie to explain to her why I might be staying home late. "I see," she replied and hung up. Katie arrived as I was leaving my sister's, and Ellie insisted that I stay for coffee and chat with my ex, rather than rushing home. It was already 8 o'clock when I walked into the house, and my dish, chicken curry, was on the dining room table, cold and frozen. "It was hot when I set the table at 7, Sophie informed me, pouring herself a glass of wine. "But not knowing when you'd finally get home, I decided to eat alone before both dishes went bad." She took a sip. "Eat it cold, reheat it, throw it away. I just cooked it. What the hell do I care?" And then I put the plate in the microwave and followed her into our living room. "I'm sorry, love, but Ellie insisted that—" Sophie interrupted my explanation. "When we got married, we agreed to change our priorities. We agreed that in the future it would be us, then family, then work." She looked at me carefully. "I know Allie keeps trying to convince you that I control you, so I won't tell you what to do. But actions have consequences, and we have an agreement. I've done my part, and so have you for now. Let's not have any misunderstandings about your responsibilities to Kathy." Before I could think of what to say in response, the microwave rang, and I went to save my food. By the time I had eaten and washed the dishes, Sophie had already gone to bed, early, very early. The mood at breakfast was polite but not warm. I apologized again, and my wife reminded me of our agreement. I told her I understood, and we went our separate ways. Things started to thaw out by that Thursday when Ellie called and asked if I could come over to help her install the TV in Katie's room. I asked why Nev, my sister's current boyfriend, couldn't do it. Turns out he was working that night. I asked Sophie if she minded. Without taking her eyes off the program she was watching, she said, "You're a big boy now, David. A married man, all grown up now. Make up your own mind." "Well, I'll just go and deal with them then. I'll probably be back before the program ends." Sophie's only response sounded like, "Humph." It actually only took an hour, but given the beer offered as a thank you and the travel time, by the time I got home, Sophie had gone to bed early again. There was hardly any conversation the next morning, and for a few days after that, neither was there. I admit I was a little hurt that my wife had been unreasonable about me helping my sister. Perhaps that's why I misjudged my reaction to Ellie's next call. Nev had 4 tickets to see a band I loved very much perform at the local soccer stadium. Did I want to join them? "Who's going?" I asked. "Me, Nev, Katie, and you, if you want a ticket," said Ellie. I asked Sophie if she was okay with me going to the concert next Saturday night. She only shrugged her shoulders. "I'd love to go," I told my sister. "Tell Neve thanks for me." I tried to explain to my wife how hard it was to see these guys perform live, but she seemed more focused on the text messages exchanged on the phone. I was reminding her how good their latest album was when she got another notification. She smiled, got up, said goodnight to me, and headed to bed. I went up to get her an hour later and found her sleeping in her pajamas. She usually slept naked. She was obviously very angry. For the rest of the week, we hardly spoke at all. It was weird. She wasn't angry, per se. If I spoke, she responded politely enough, but without warmth. And the only conversations she made on her own went something like, "Pass the salt," or "Did you take out the trash cans?" Anyway, week after week dragged on, and then Saturday came. Nev was picking me up at 7:30, and Katie was anxious to meet Sophie. They still hadn't met. A little after 7 p.m., Sophie came downstairs wearing a short dress that showed off her long, slender legs. The low top flaunted her stunning breasts, and on her feet were high-heeled shoes that further emphasized her stunning belly. Her hair was beautifully styled, and her makeup was flawless. "Sophie," I sighed, "you look amazing. Are you going on a date?" Okay, I'll admit it. On the list of the dumbest questions I'd ever asked, this one had to top the list. She looked at me incredulously, then corrected herself. "You're going out with your friends Saturday night. I've arranged to go with mine." She didn't offer anything else, and even I knew better than to ask. She rummaged through her bag, making sure she had her keys and wallet with her, and stood up, checking her phone. I heard one car pull up to the house, followed by another. Moments later, my wife's cell phone rang. She checked it. "It's my Uber," she said, walking toward the door. I followed her and stood in the doorway as she passed my sister, Nev, and Katie. "Hi, Nev," she greeted him as they stepped aside to let her pass. She ignored the two stunned women and climbed into her elevator, giving Nev a perfect view of her silky thighs and stocking tops. "Fuck!" Nev heard Neve sigh before Ellie caught up with him. "Was that Sophie?" "She's gorgeous," Katie commented. "Ignorant bitch," my sister muttered. "Where is she going anyway? On a Saturday night dressed like a prostitute?" "She's going with her friends, not sitting alone," I explained. In retrospect, it looked pathetic. The concert went great, and I had the good sense to ask Nev to drop me off on the way home, even though Ellie insisted that I should go back to their place for some drinks. I was home by 11:30 and went to bed alone just after midnight. I heard Sophie come in around 30. Oddly enough, she took a shower before she went to bed. The next 2 weeks were awkward. Sophie seemed aloof, unemotional. She socialized, but she didn't take the initiative. If I asked a question, she answered politely, but nothing more. "Rough day at work?" I asked. "Not really," she answered. She never once asked about the concert. I did, however, ask about her night out. This led to the longest sentence she uttered that week. "Kelly and Vince were going out for her birthday. Her brother is living with them on vacation in the RAF, so I made a foursome, just like you." I know it was 3 sentences, but the point still stands. We ate together and slept in the same bed as before, but she seemed to have pulled away. I saw Ellie and Katie a couple times after work when Ellie asked if I could pick up my things to take to our parents. Sophie hadn't noticed anything. The final turning point was when Ellie invited me to a friend's wedding. Some members of the bride's family had apparently canceled due to illness, and there was room for new friends at the last minute. I knew this girl well. She was part of the circle that Ellie and Katie had been part of at university. I asked if Sophie could come with me. Ellie agreed, albeit reluctantly. I told Sophie about the invitation, emphasizing that she was invited too. "No." That was all she said in response. I pointed out that there were double rooms available for couples. "What a surprise," she replied. "I have other plans." The next week was even colder. I tried to explain that the bride was my friend, but Sophie only nodded and said, "That's nice." I asked her if she wished I wasn't going. She replied, "It's not for me to say." I finally decided that since I had already accepted the invitation, I should go. I explained my thought to my wife, and she nodded and went back to reading. Later that evening, as we were getting ready for bed, I remarked that it seemed like it had been a long time since we last had sex. Her remark, "I know when I last had sex," puzzled me. It seemed that every I was emphasized and implied something I was missing. My attempts to find out exactly what it was were ignored. The wedding was on Saturday, and we would drive there after work on Friday and return after lunch on Sunday. When I got home from work Friday afternoon, Sophie was halfway through ironing. That was pleasing. It would save me time. But no. She picked up a pile of ironed clothes and headed for the bedroom. I looked around at the rest of my clothes, all mine, of course. I picked out a couple shirts and set to work. By the time I joined my wife, she was already standing on the bed and neatly arranging her clothes in her suitcase. I looked at her questioningly. She ignored me. "Are you going somewhere nice?" I ventured to ask. "No, I thought since I'm alone all weekend, I'd treat myself to a particularly shitty trip," came the sarcastic reply. I guess I deserved it. I seem to have taken all the top spots on my list of stupid questions this month. "I was just wondering what you had planned," I explained. "Well, isn't that nice of you? Showing interest in little old me. It makes me feel very appreciated." She finished packing and went into the bathroom. I unpacked my suitcase. By the time she came out, wrapped in a towel, I was done and risked being late. After a quick shower and shave, I hurriedly got dressed. Opening my overnight bag for one last check, I found a box of condoms. I hadn't put them in there. What the hell? Frowning, I opened the box to see if it really did contain contraceptives. It did, and inside lay a note. It read, "In case Ellie trips Katie up and she accidentally falls on you." It was ridiculous. I closed the briefcase, grabbed my wallet and keys, and went to talk to Sophie. She had to realize that nothing had happened between me and Katie. Sophie sat looking at her phone in the living room. "I'm not sleeping with Katie this weekend," I told her. "Why? Is she going to have her period?" my wife absent-mindedly replied. "What? No, how should I know? What makes you think I'm going to sleep with her?" I asked. "Because Ellie wants you to, and you always do what Ellie wants you to do. It's not rocket science." She furrowed her eyebrows. 5 letters, hitting a puppet. What? There seemed to be 2 conversations going on here, and I didn't understand either of them. What was that? Sophie seemed mildly amused by my confusion. "Oh, Punch, of course." She tapped the screen and there was a triumphant fanfare. I didn't know what to say. My wife had assumed I'd be spending the next 2 nights in bed with my ex, but instead of getting angry, she seemed unconcerned. She was more interested in doing crossword puzzles on her phone. She knew I wouldn't cheat, but... Her phone rang. She stood up, gathered her coat and suitcase, and headed for the door. I followed her again, but this time there wasn't even a goodbye. She did pause, though, and turned to me as she stepped outside. "Tell Ellie she won. I concede," and walked away. Nev's car was quiet during the 2-hour drive to our hotel. Nev seemed out of sorts. He was uncomfortable, embarrassed, perhaps even annoyed. Ellie paid him no attention. She seemed unfathomably enthusiastic, while Katie seemed more distracted. I sat in the back, along with Katie, and immersed myself in my thoughts, going over the events of the past few weeks in my mind. It wasn't very comfortable. Nev announced that we were only about 10 miles away from arrival, which prompted me to ask the obvious question that I should already know the answer to. "Where am I going to sleep tonight?" I asked my sister, as Sophie's words echoed. Neve's shoulders seemed to tense up even more. "Well, I was going to share with Katie, but you and Nev sleeping in the same bed sounds a little gay, so I thought if you two would be comfortable." "What?" Kathy was brought out of her reverie. "Sharing a bed with a married man? Are you out of your mind? What would Sophie think?" "Yes, sis. What would Sophie think if you invited me over to make the bed, put up the TV, use the winning tickets, invite me over at the last minute, and sleep in the same bed as my ex?" Ellie played dumb. "Nev?" It probably wouldn't be fair to drag him into this, but I didn't care anymore. "Why didn't you hang up Kathy's TV?" Ellie stared at him, as if daring him to contradict her. He shrugged before answering. "I offered, but Allie said it would be better if you did it." "And the bed?" I continued. "Same thing, Dave. It was a pain in the ass to have it lying around for a week," waiting to be screwed on. "What are you saying, David?" asked Kathy. "What's going on?" I looked at my sister with disdain. That self-centered bitch is intentionally manipulating us. She wants you and me to get back together, to keep you around this time. She probably dreams of being the cool auntie to our kids. "But Sophie was fine with you coming," Kathy objected. "Ellie said she—" Her voice broke as the realization of my sister's deception came. "That's why she was so rude when we went to the concert, isn't it?" I nodded. "Sophie knows Ellie doesn't like her. She's too conventional. Ellie also accused my wife of controlling me. She isn't. That's the problem. We agreed on boundaries and priorities. Us, family, career. All I had to do was keep that in mind, but since Sophie didn't explicitly say no, I just let myself be led around." Katie fell silent, digesting what she had just learned. "Nev, take us back to the house. I won't be sleeping here tonight, and David should be home. If Sophie has reason to believe we had sex, his marriage is over." Nev looked at Ellie. "Are you staying?" he asked. Something about his tone was off. Damn. I wish I was better at picking up on subtexts. "Yes," she answered adamantly. "We're all staying. The price of a cab home is going to be ruinous, so these two are staying with us until we're ready to leave." From my seat in the back seat, I could see the look on his face in the driver's mirror. He seemed relieved. I couldn't figure out why. We drove in silence, Katie holding my hand. It was more a gesture of support than intimacy, but Ellie, seeing us like this, looking over her shoulder, smiled contentedly. Finally, we stopped in front of the remote country estate where the wedding was being held. Ellie was obviously so anxious to get us all signed in that she unbuckled her seatbelt almost just before the car came to a stop. Nev followed her out of the car, discreetly raising his hand to tell us to wait. He opened the trunk and pulled out a single briefcase from there. He put it in place and closed the trunk door. "I'm taking them home," he said to Ellie. "No," she pleaded. "You'll ruin everything. You'll be wrecked after driving like that anyway. You'll be too tired to enjoy the wedding." "I won't, because I have no intention of going back." He shook his head disappointedly. "If your own brother's marriage means so little to you, why the hell should I believe you'll treat me any better? Drop my number, Eleanor. We're done." We left her there, shouting after her through tears of anger and frustration. Nev apologized as we drove home. I only started noticing a pattern in the last week or so. I succumbed to her games, too. Katie also reassured me that she didn't know about Ellie's scheming. "In fact," she told us, "I'm moving to Belgium in 3 weeks. There's a temporary vacancy not far from Bruges for my maternity leave. It would be foolish to miss such a chance. I only got the offer yesterday, and I knew it would upset Ellie, so I decided not to ruin the weekend." "Now I wish I hadn't," she said venomously. The three of us discussed how each of us planned to deal with the aftermath of my sister's manipulation. We decided that Nev would leave me at home to try to save my marriage, and he and Katie would get all their stuff from Ellie's house. Katie would stay with Nev until she could move to Bruges, and neither of them would want to talk to my sister again. So here I am, sitting in the apartment this Sunday evening. I texted Sophie to let her know I was back home, alone, when Nev dropped me off Friday night. Her reply, "Good for you," wasn't very reassuring. I texted the next morning. "I miss you. Can you come back early?" She eventually replied. "No." She came in 20 minutes ago, barely greeting me, and left for the bedroom. I followed her. I explained how Ellie had tried to set things up to encourage Katie and I to get back together. Sophie just stared at me in silence. I realized. "But every single thing seemed to make so much sense on its own," I objected. "Us, families, careers," Sophie reminded me. "How the hell hard was it to memorize that? 3 simple words in reverse alphabetical order. Nowhere does it mention X's." She squeezed past me into the bathroom, closing the door behind her. "Kathy was never interested in rekindling our relationship," I called out through the door. My wife didn't answer. "I suppose we have something to talk about," I suggested. "You think?" came the muffled reply. She added something else, but almost all of it was lost in the noise of the flowing water. And here I was, waiting for her to finish her shower. looking forward to putting the misunderstandings behind us and clearing the air. I knew she was ready to start talking again, because thinking back to her last comment, I was sure she had said something like, "Yes, David, we definitely need to talk."